For 3 years, the Sterling family believed they knew exactly who I was. Julian's quiet wife. The polite daughter-in-law. The woman who would smile through an insult, carry their bags, fix their schedules, and stay silent whenever someone crossed the line. They were wrong. Because while they were busy deciding how little I mattered, I was building a career powerful enough to change their entire financial future. My name is Victoria, and professionally I was a lead investment strategist at Apex Equity, one of the firms handling distressed corporate assets in New York. My days were spent studying companies that were drowning in debt, analyzing their balance sheets, identifying weaknesses, and deciding whether millions of dollars were worth saving or buying. Executives twice my age listened carefully when I spoke. But whenever I walked into the Sterling family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, all of that disappeared. To them, I wasn't a financial strategist. I was simply Julian's wife. And apparently that meant I was available. Every Sunday dinner felt like a quiet trial. Eleanor Sterling, Julian's mother, would sit at the head of the table like she owned the entire room. She criticized my clothes, my work schedule, my family background, even the fact that Julian and I weren't having children according to her preferred timeline. One evening, she passed me the gravy while casually saying, "Victoria, you really should consider helping Richard more. A woman in this family should support the family business." I looked at her. "Richard already has an executive team." Eleanor smiled. "A team isn't the same as family." Across the table sat Richard, Julian's older brother, the golden child, the man Eleanor believed could do no wrong. Richard ran Sterling Enterprises, the family's manufacturing company, but from everything I could see professionally, he was running it straight into the ground. Margins were shrinking. Debt was increasing. Vendors were complaining. And yet Richard continued showing up at country clubs wearing expensive watches and talking about expansion. He treated the company like an unlimited credit card. And I knew something they didn't. I had already seen Sterling Enterprises' financial reports. The numbers were ugly. Very ugly. But I never said a word. Not because I was afraid. Because I had learned something important. Sometimes silence gives you more information than confrontation ever could. The real problem, however, wasn't Eleanor or Richard. It was Julian. Whenever his mother insulted me, Julian would gently touch my knee beneath the table and whisper, "Just let it go, Vic." Whenever Richard ordered me around, Julian would say, "Please, don't make this a bigger issue." 3 years of marriage had taught me that Julian wasn't cruel. He was simply spineless. He had spent his entire life trying to earn his mother's approval, and whenever forced to choose between protecting his wife and keeping his family comfortable, he chose silence. Every single time. Then came the Tuesday night that changed everything. I had just returned from Manhattan when I received an invitation to a private meeting with Apex Equity's managing partners. I expected another difficult corporate review. Instead, I walked into the conference room and saw several senior executives waiting for me. My managing partner smiled. "Victoria, we've been watching your performance very closely." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was the biggest promotion of my career. Chief Risk Officer, an executive equity stake, and direct oversight of Apex's distressed commercial asset portfolio. It wasn't just a promotion. It was financial independence. Years of 70-hour weeks had finally paid off. That night, I drove home through the rain with the offer sitting beside me. For once, I wanted to share something with Julian before telling anyone else. I thought maybe he would be proud. Maybe he would finally look at me and see the woman I'd become. Instead, when I told him, his face changed. "Victoria, you can't take it." I stared at him. "Excuse me." He started pacing. "If my mother finds out you're going to have a bigger position than Richard, it's going to create problems." I almost laughed. "My promotion is a problem. You don't understand." "No," I said quietly. "I understand perfectly." 2 days later, we were sitting around the Sterling dinner table. Eleanor placed her fork down. The sound echoed through the room. "Victoria," she said, Julian told us about your promotion. Richard leaned back with a smug smile. Eleanor continued. We've discussed it as a family decision about my career. I already knew where this was going. We believe you should decline the position. The room went silent. I slowly put down my glass. Why? Richard answered before Eleanor could. Because Sterling Enterprises needs someone full-time. You can become my executive assistant. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. I looked at Eleanor. Then Richard. Then Julian. You want me to turn down a chief risk officer position? Pause. To become Richard's assistant. Richard smirked. Family comes first. Then I looked at Julian. This was his moment. 3 years of marriage. One sentence could have changed everything. Instead, he lowered his eyes. Vic. Maybe you could do it. It would help the family. Something inside me went completely still. No anger. No tears. Just clarity. I took a slow sip of water. Then I smiled. They thought they had just forced me into a corner. They didn't realize they had finally given me a reason to stop protecting them. And the next morning I was going to find out just how close the Sterling family really was to financial collapse. Because their biggest secret was already sitting on my desk at Apex Equity. And once I opened that file, there would be no going back. The next morning I walked into Apex Equity feeling different. For 3 years, I had spent too much energy trying to earn the Sterling family's respect. That morning I stopped caring. I walked through the glass doors of our Manhattan office, placed my bag on my desk, and looked at the promotion papers sitting in front of me. Chief Risk Officer. Executive Equity. Full authority over Apex's distressed commercial asset portfolio. Picked up the pen. And signed. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Then I opened the confidential database. I searched one name. Sterling Enterprises. The file appeared almost instantly. I stared at the screen. And for the first time I saw the full picture. The company wasn't simply struggling. It was drowning. Sterling Enterprises had taken on millions in debt to finance several expansion projects that had failed. Their suppliers were demanding payment. Their credit lines were approaching maturity. Equipment had been mortgaged. And Richard had been moving money between accounts just to keep the appearance of stability alive. But then I saw something that made me sit back in my chair. $12 million asset-backed loan. 3 years earlier, Richard had borrowed the money through an institutional lender. The collateral wasn't just company equipment. The Greenwich family estate was attached to the loan. So was the primary manufacturing facility. And there was more. Richard and Eleanor had personally guaranteed portions of the debt. I checked the payment history. My eyes narrowed. The loan had reached maturity. And Sterling Enterprises had already defaulted. A formal notice had been issued 48 hours earlier. 48 hours. The exact same period during which Eleanor had been sitting at the dinner table telling me to quit my career and become Richard's assistant. I leaned back. For a few seconds I said nothing. Then I whispered, "You have no idea what you've done." The original lender had already decided to sell the distressed note. They didn't want Sterling's problems anymore. They wanted out. And because the loan was in default, the note could be purchased at a significant discount. I stared at the numbers. The Sterling family had spent years acting like they were untouchable. Old money, country clubs, luxury cars, private dinners, expensive suits. But beneath all of it was a company that couldn't survive without borrowed money. And now their debt was available for purchase. I could have walked away. I could have told Julian. I could have warned Richard. I could have called Eleanor and said, "Your company is about to collapse." But then I remembered the dinner. Family comes first. I remembered Richard's smirk. "You can become my assistant." And most of all, I remembered Julian looking down at the table. Maybe Richard has a point. Something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to destroy them because they insulted me. I was going to let their own decisions catch up with them. That distinction mattered. I called our chief legal counsel into my office. He walked in carrying a folder. "What's going on?" I turned the monitor toward him. "Sterling Enterprises." He studied the numbers. His expression changed. "How much?" 12 million. He looked at me. "They're in default. Active default." He slowly closed the folder. "That's ugly." He nodded. Then I said the words that would change everything. "I want the note." He stared at me for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Completely." Within hours, the legal team began the acquisition process. Apex Equity purchased the distressed $12 million note for $8.5 million. The transaction was aggressive, but it was legal, and the risk assessment supported it. The wire cleared. The assignments were signed. The guarantees were transferred. The collateral documents were transferred. And suddenly, the family that had spent 3 years treating me like an outsider had a very different problem. Their debt now belonged to my division. Their company was under my oversight. Their manufacturing facility was collateral. Their Greenwich estate was collateral. And Richard's personal guarantees were attached to the deal. I sat alone in my office after the paperwork was completed. The city lights reflected against the glass windows. I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. I simply felt calm. Because I knew something they didn't. They were still planning my humiliation. I was already planning their financial reckoning. That evening I went home. Julian was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up. "Mom wants your resignation letter tomorrow." I took off my coat. "I'll handle it." He nodded. Then he said, "She's actually giving you another chance." I almost smiled. "Another chance? Richard needs help. You could make this work." I looked at him carefully. 3 years. 3 years of asking him to stand beside me. 3 years of being told to stay quiet. And he still didn't understand. "Julian," I said softly, "do you ever wonder what happens when someone stops being afraid of losing your family?" He looked confused. "What does that mean?" "Nothing." I walked away. He didn't know that while he was sitting on our couch asking me to surrender my career, I had already purchased the debt threatening everything his family owned. But I wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. The next day, Richard called an emergency board meeting. He planned to present a fake expansion strategy to investors. Apparently, he still believed he could convince everyone that Sterling Enterprises was recovering. I received the invitation. Eleanor even added a message. "Victoria, please attend and take notes for Richard." I read it twice. Then I smiled. "Of course," I replied. Because Friday afternoon, I wouldn't be sitting in the corner taking minutes. I would be sitting at the table with the documents that could bring their entire empire to its knees. And they still had absolutely no idea who was walking into that boardroom. Friday afternoon arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the sleeves of my charcoal suit. For years, I had dressed carefully for Sterling family events. Nothing too expensive. Nothing that would make Eleanor uncomfortable. Nothing that would give Richard another excuse to remind me that I wasn't really part of the family. That day was different. I wasn't dressing for them. I was dressing for the meeting. I picked up my leather folder and walked out. Julian was waiting downstairs. He looked at me and frowned. "You're wearing that." I grabbed my keys. "Yes," he sighed. "Mom said you should look more professional but not intimidating." I looked at him. "That's interesting." "What?" "Nothing." He didn't know what was inside my folder. None of them did. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom was already crowded when we arrived. Mahogany walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive artwork, a long conference table surrounded by investors, executives, and family members. Everything about the room screamed wealth. But I knew the truth. Most of what they were sitting inside was financed by debt. Eleanor sat near the head of the table, perfectly composed. Richard stood beside a large screen, preparing his presentation. Julian quietly took a seat near the back. The moment Eleanor saw me, Her expression tightened. Victoria, you're late. I looked at the clock. I was 3 minutes early. I'm right on time. She pointed toward a small table beside the coffee station. Sit there. Richard will need you to take minutes. For years I might have obeyed. That day I simply smiled. No. Eleanor blinked. What did you say? I won't be sitting there today. Richard stopped adjusting his tie. Victoria, this is a private corporate meeting. I know. Then act like it. I walked toward the main table. Richard's face hardened. You need to leave if you're going to make a scene. I placed my leather folder on the table. I'm not here to make a scene. I sat down. I'm here because Apex Equity owns something this company owes. The room became strangely quiet. Richard stared at me. What are you talking about? I opened my folder. Then I placed 3 documents on the table. One in front of Eleanor, one in front of Richard, and one in front of the company's legal counsel. The lawyer picked up his copy first. His eyes moved across the page. Then stopped. His face changed. Richard noticed. What is it? I looked directly at him. 24 hours ago, Apex Equity acquired the entirety of Sterling Enterprises' $12 million defaulted debt note. Richard laughed. It wasn't a confident laugh. It was nervous. No. I said nothing. He looked toward the lawyer. Tell her she's wrong. The lawyer kept reading. Then he quietly said, She's not wrong. Richard's face lost its color. Continued. As Chief Risk Officer of Apex Equity, I am exercising our contractual rights under the note. Eleanor's expression changed. Victoria. I slid another document across the table. The full balance is now due. Richard grabbed the paper. This is impossible. You defaulted. We were negotiating. You missed the payment. We were restructuring. You were hiding the default. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Leaned back. There's another part you should read. Richard's eyes dropped to the document. His hands began to shake. I pointed to the collateral section. The Greenwich estate. Eleanor froze. The manufacturing facility. Richard swallowed. And the personal guarantees. Silence. Absolute silence. Then Eleanor slammed her hand against the table. Julian. Her voice cracked. Control your wife. Julian stood up. His face was pale. Victoria, please. I looked at him. He walked toward me. I don't understand. That's the problem. What are you doing? Understood. I'm doing what you told me to do. He stared at me. When? I looked around the room. When you told me family comes first. His expression collapsed. You can't do this to us. I shook my head. I'm not doing this to you. I pointed toward Richard. He borrowed the money. Then Eleanor. She protected him. Then back to Julian. And you stood there while they tried to destroy my career. Julian lowered his voice. Vic, please. We can fix this. I looked into his eyes. You had 3 years to fix it. He didn't respond. Continued. 3 years to defend me. 3 years to tell your mother to stop. 3 years to tell your brother that I wasn't his assistant. My voice remained calm. And every single time you chose silence. The legal counsel finally spoke. If the balance isn't satisfied within the contractual period, Apex can initiate receivership and foreclosure proceedings. Eleanor stared at him. You're telling me we could lose the house? He nodded. And the company. Richard suddenly stood. This is a setup. He pointed at me. She planned this. I looked at him. No, Richard. Pause. You planned this. He stepped closer. You married into this family. And you thought that meant you owned me. His face turned red. I opened the final document. The deadline is 4 o'clock. Richard looked at the clock. That's impossible. Check my watch. Then you have a problem. The room erupted into chaos. Executives started making calls. Richard grabbed his phone. Eleanor began demanding answers. Julian stood frozen between his family and me. For the first time in 3 years, nobody was telling me to keep the peace. Because there was no peace left to keep. There was only the consequence of their own choices. Closed my folder. And before leaving, I looked at Julian one last time. You wanted me to be the family's assistant. Paused at the door. Today, I'm the person holding the keys to everything you were so afraid I would outgrow. Then I walked away. Behind me, I heard Eleanor's voice breaking. And for the first time, nobody was laughing at me. By 4 o'clock, the Sterling family had run out of options. I was sitting in my office at Apex Equity when the final reports came through. No wire transfer. No emergency investor. No miracle. Nothing. Sterling Enterprises couldn't produce the $12 million required to satisfy the default. The phone on my desk rang. It was our legal counsel. Victoria, we've reached the deadline. I looked out through the glass windows at Manhattan. Proceed. One word. That was all it took. The legal machinery moved immediately. Receivership proceedings began. The company's control shifted under Apex's authority. The manufacturing facility was secured. And foreclosure proceedings were initiated against the Greenwich estate. The same house where Eleanor had spent years reminding me that I wasn't good enough. The same dining room where she had told me to abandon my career. The same family that believed their name made them untouchable was now discovering that debt didn't care about family names. That evening my phone started exploding with messages. First Eleanor. Then Richard. Then Julian. I ignored all of them. Julian called 17 times. Then 20. Then 30. Finally a voicemail appeared. His voice sounded completely different. No confidence. No excuses. Just fear. Victoria. Please call me back. Another voicemail arrived. We can fix this. Then another. My mom is devastated. I listened to that one twice. Not because I felt sorry for Eleanor. Because I suddenly realized something. They still thought this was about them. They still didn't understand what had actually happened. This wasn't revenge because I wanted their house. It wasn't revenge because I wanted their money. It was the consequence of years of believing they could control another human being simply because she married into their family. The Sterling family had confused my silence with weakness. That was their biggest mistake. 2 weeks later I filed for divorce. I didn't make a dramatic announcement. I didn't send Julian a long letter. I simply signed the paperwork. When Julian found out, he came to my apartment. He stood outside my door for several minutes before knocking. Opened it. He looked exhausted. I know I don't deserve another chance. I said nothing. I should have defended you. Still nothing. He swallowed. I was afraid of my mother. I looked at him. And you were never afraid of losing me. His eyes dropped. That answer was enough. He whispered. I'm sorry. I believed him. But forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness means finally accepting that someone showed you exactly who they were. I stepped back from the doorway. Goodbye, Julian. He looked at me one last time. Then walked away. Closed the door. And for the first time in 3 years, my home was completely silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of a family dinner. Not the silence of someone swallowing an insult. Is real peace. Months later, Sterling Enterprises was restructured under Apex's management. The assets were evaluated. The liabilities were settled according to the legal process. Richard lost control of the company. Eleanor lost the estate. And Julian lost the marriage he had spent 3 years failing to protect. As for me, I became exactly what they had spent years trying to prevent. Independent, successful, and completely free. One morning I stood inside my new corner office at Apex Equity. The Manhattan skyline stretched across the windows. Cars moved far below. People rushed between buildings. The city didn't know what had happened. And honestly, I didn't need it to. I thought back to that Sunday dinner. Eleanor's words. Richard's arrogance. Julian's silence. Family comes first. Smiled. They had been right about one thing. Family should come first. But your family should never require you to destroy yourself just to make them comfortable. I didn't destroy the Sterling family. They built the trap themselves. Richard borrowed money he couldn't repay. Eleanor protected his decisions. Julian protected their feelings instead of his marriage. And when the consequences finally arrived, they looked for someone to blame. They blamed me. Because blaming me was easier than admitting the truth. They had created their own downfall. And I simply stopped standing underneath it. That was the most satisfying part. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten them. I didn't beg them to respect me. I simply took control of my own life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's becoming so strong, so independent, and so impossible to control that the people who once underestimated you can do nothing but watch you walk away. And that's exactly what I did. I walked away. With my career. With my dignity. With my freedom. And without looking back. So if you've ever been treated like you were less important than everyone else in the room, remember this. Never confuse being quiet with being powerless. Sometimes the quietest person at the table is the one who understands the entire game. They're just waiting for the right moment to stop playing. If this story gave you that satisfying feeling of seeing someone finally take their power back, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments. Would you have stayed silent like Victoria? Or would you have confronted the Sterling family much earlier? Because sometimes karma doesn't knock. Sometimes it walks through the front door holding the paperwork.